Welcome to the ukulele build part 4. We will continue building our Stuart McDonald concert ukulele kit. The last video we had completed gluing up the body, and in this video we will proceed along getting the fretwork done and working on the neck. Okay, while that dries, I'm going to wipe up any glue drips. We're going to get back to our fingerboard. When we left off on the fingerboard, we had just installed the frets. Now we're going to actually work with the fingerboard while the body dries. So the first thing we need to do is we need to nip off these ends, and these are special nippers. They are totally flat. They will get as close as they can to the fingerboard. We're going to nip those frets off. Before I go any further, I'm going to sweep all these little pieces off because they will scratch whatever I put on the bench. Okay, I'm going to put some double stick tape on the back of the fretboard. I'm going to stick it down to the bench for the next step. Don't want it sliding around. Now I'm going to use this tool, which is going to sand off the fret ends, and it's going to create a bevel on the frets themselves. You want to go until you have a nice even bevel on all the sides of the frets. Then we're going to take it off, turn it around, and do the other side. Alright, now that that's done, we have to level the frets, because when you hammer them in, you may put dents in them. They may not all seat perfectly even. These are seated nice and flat, but I guarantee you they're not level. And we're going to show you how to prove that in just a second. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to use a Sharpie, and I'm going to put a line across the top of each fret. Okay, so what I did is I have taped it back down. I've put Sharpie on all the frets. Now I'm going to take a straight edge sanding bar. It's got 400 grit sandpaper on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this up the fretboard, just over the tops of the frets a couple times. And this is going to tell us where the high spots and the low spots are.
I'm going to keep doing this until all of the Sharpie is gone from the top of the frets. And that's when we know that the frets are all level with each other. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of leveling that still needs to be done. I use 400 grit because I don't want to take too much off. I want to stop when I get exactly level. Now this is a nice flat workbench that I'm on, so I know that the fingerboard is flat, but I'm going to continue to sand until we're down low. Okay, I got my granite plate just to make sure it was flat. Now if you can see, I've pretty much knocked the tops off. Some of these are very, very flat. So now what we need to do is we need to go through, we need to re-crown these frets so that they are round, or at least semi-pointed. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can do this with this is a crowning file. It's got a smooth edge in the corner so it won't damage the fretboard. You can take this and you can just go along each side of the fret. Until you build it back up into a point. What you also want to do again before you do that is put a dot of the Sharpie on each fret again. And what you're going to do is you're going to crown them until you've just got a thin line left. I've also got another type of fret file. This one is cut into the shape like the fret. So this is for narrow and medium. These are narrow frets. So we just run this on the fret. Remember, a file only cuts in one direction, so and this will probably be good for some of the ones that weren't flattened too much. So what I've done now that I've got everything crowned is I'm going over it with some polishing rubbers. And I'm starting with coarse. We're trying to get the file marks out, which with the fret crowning file, those are very, very fine. We're going to get these frets polished up and smooth. So that's the coarse. All we do is take it. We're going to the next one we're going to is a medium grit. Medium, we're going to do the same with fine and extra fine. Okay, the frets are leveled and crowned. You can buff them if you have the means to buff them. A little compound. You're just going to be careful not to get anything on the fretboard, so you'd want to mask it off with tape. I think these frets look pretty good, and we're going to continue to the next step. The only other step that's left on the frets right now is to file the ends smooth, and that's just done by you do around where the bevel is. You're going to pull off any sharpness that's remaining. I prefer to do this once the fingerboard's glued onto the neck, because at that point I can get a good feel for how smooth it is. So we're going to hold off on that until we get the neck glued on, and that's where we'll go to. Alright, the top should have sufficiently dried, so we're going to unclamp that assembly. here the next step will be to even up these sides. So we're going to do that with a combination of a bandsaw and a router. I'm going to use the bandsaw to get it a little bit closer. Some of these places are a little too bigger, a little too, stick out a little farther than I really want to hit with a router. I really want to have about 1/8 of an inch. Now here comes the part that gets anyone who's building an instrument very, very nervous. This is where you've done all that work and you're going to take a router and you're going to clean off the edges. Now you can do this with sandpaper, you can do it with a plane, although getting into these curves is very difficult with a plane. I like the router method, it works very well, but you've got to be really careful. There is a nice chart in the instructions that shows you which direction to go with the router. We're always going to be doing down into the curve. Alright, don't try to go all around in one direction. You're gonna tear out the grain if you try to come up here. So I'm going to give it a shot, see how it goes. I'm starting with the back, because if I make a real bad mistake here, I'll go to another method. Pretty good. Yeah, it's working very well. Alright, we are sanded flush. A little bit of a gap on that edge, but we will be able to fill that. But otherwise it looks pretty good. We'll sand everything flush. The only concern I have with this, and this is a kit concern, is that they used a light colored core wood for the laminated back, which shows up. Maybe when we sand it up it'll look good enough that we'd be almost like a fake binding. But if not, we'll put a bit of stain in there to cover that up. Alright, so now comes one of the most nerve-wracking parts, and parts that has to be extremely precise, is fitting the neck to the body. So what I've done is I've inserted these dowel pins into the holes that they pre-drilled in the neck. I'm lining it up on the center line, and I'm going to press the pins in, and this is going to give me the location to where I have to drill the dowel holes in the body. Now, the key is we have to drill very straight holes, otherwise the neck is not going to fit onto the body. As you can see, it's a pretty good fit as it is right now. I'm going to need to do a little tweaking of the joint to get it to be nice and tight, but this actually is very, very good fit. So to drill those out, I've got to take a 1/4 inch bit and I've got to guide it vertically and horizontally straight into the body, into that neck block. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. Okay, so we stood this up in the drill press, letting it sit flat. I'm lining up the hole, with the drill bit. And I'm making sure that we are vertical. And we're going to go for it. Okay, now the next part is going to be to attach the fingerboard to the neck. So to align the fingerboard with the neck, the nut is going to go, the edge of the nut goes up against where the angle of the headstock begins, and the fingerboard meets it right at that point. So I'm going to mark that with a pencil line. Okay. Now we need some way of making sure that the fingerboard doesn't slide when we glue it on. So what I usually do is I take a staple, a very small staple, and I pop it into the neck, one on each end, and then I cut off the top. I'll show you what we do. So I take the staple gun and I drive a staple. I don't press the staple gun firmly against the neck. I want it to be protruding a little bit. So I'm going to drive a staple in that location. I'm going to drive a staple in that location. I'm going to pry up one side of the staple, bend it up, and then I'm going to clip off all but a little tiny nub on the staple. I'm just going to use a pair of needle nose pliers. I'm going to make sure that is nice and straight. Alright, so I've made sure that it's sticking straight up. I'm going to place my nut back in place on the line. I'm going to take the fingerboard, make sure it's completely lined up where it needs to go. And then I'm going to press it down onto those staples. I'm going to pop it off, and now there are two little marks where that was. I'm going to drill a 1/16 hole, just make sure you don't go through the board, just to give it enough guidance to go back in when we put the board on when it's glue. I'm going to do a test clamp up. So what I've done is I have clamped it to the edge of the bench. I'm going to lay the fingerboard in place on my marks, and we're going to use this guy to wrap up the fingerboard. That seems to hold it down really well. I really like this method of clamping. This material really sticks very well to itself, and to what it's working with. I can't budge that, so it's a go. We're going to undo this, put some glue on, and hope for the best. Okay, for the glue up, what I did is I put a little piece of painter's tape where the nut's going to go. I don't want to get any glue there. I don't want to put glue on the fingerboard because the fingerboard overhangs, and we're going to need to put glue on the fingerboard when we glue the neck on. So I'm just going to take my glue, clean the tip off. Alright, we don't want to go too crazy, but we need to have enough glue to hold that fingerboard on securely. again, this mahogany, this is African mahogany. It seems to really soak up the glue. Set the fingerboard in place on our marks, and we're going to clamp her down. There we go. We've got good squeeze out all the length of the board. I'm not seeing any gaps. We're going to let this dry, and then we can glue the neck onto the body.